How do you reward gaming?
53 total. 20 per impression. 30 or 20-ish.
Yeah, it worked great. I use them on Zoom calls all the time.
Yeah, I saw she signed up.
Like $9, $10 online.
Yeah.
Fold. Yeah, it folds right up. Fold a little.
Oh, I know. That was
Isabella had one I sold. Bought 4 more.
that was the one nice thing about the windows is that, you know, when the campus was shut down, nobody was like, so you can park wherever you wanted.
I get a lot of
Yeah,
good luck.
And the hard part about university campuses is that there are no physical addresses for buildings, so you can't even, I can't say, oh, if you put this in your GPS, you can find it.
Hello.
Welcome. Good to see you.
Yeah, how are you? I haven't seen you in a while.
I know, it's been a few years. But glad to see you. How are things? Yeah? Staying well?
That's
good.
Tired. I was a teacher.
Okay, just grab a seat.
Yeah, wherever you like.
Okay,
I don't think my aunt's going to get back into the take it out. Spruce it up.
I was,
I'm Tim Morgan with How are Right.
There were 4 or 5 companies that made Packer,
Chris Red there.
I can see it, I know others can. Well,
Michigan still has, last I heard,
Just letting you know that it's currently on. And
not surprised. You can wait, Lake Erie and and we're just out there. My father-in-law's from that area. He has slots, very so we had a funeral up there.
just so you're where we are, like you right now. So the mic is hot. Exactly. All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and
He's got a slot up there too, so I'll probably go on that. I spent the summer right here. Bob Trax, congressman from the Thumb. Yeah. And he was the best man at my in-laws' wedding. And Katie worked for him. She was head of Ways and Means. Till about 10 years, 15 years. He and my father-in-law grew up in the UP up in Newbury. And my father-in-law was a staunch Republican, and Bob Trax was a staunch Democrat.
And Bob is
But they were best friends. Joined at the hip. That's correct. Too bad there aren't one of those these days. Yeah.
checking the chat. All right. Cool. Your microphones are not on, so be sure to turn them on. All right, Jeanne, are we ready? Okay. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Tim Horgan, and I am the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. The World Affairs Council of New Hampshire is so excited to be able to present this special program entitled Stay in the Course in Ukraine, Why Western Support is Vital. The World Affairs Council of New Hampshire is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, community-supported organization, which means we can only continue to bring these great programs to our global community centered here in New Hampshire through the support of our members, donors, sponsors, and supporters. So thank you to everyone who has made this possible, continues to make our work possible. And if you haven't yet had the opportunity to support our work, we'll welcome you with open arms and appreciate you taking the time to support global conversations here in New Hampshire. We are also a nonpartisan organization, which means we do not take any stances on politics, parties, policies, or candidates. All of our events are provided for informational purposes only, and we look at ourselves as the platform for community discussions. We view these as the start of the conversation, certainly not the end, and we hope that you take the opportunity to use the information that you hear tonight or today, whenever you're watching, whether in person, online, or the recording. That also means that the views expressed here tonight, today, whenever you're watching, is of course those of the speakers themselves and do not necessarily represent that of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire or any of our sponsors. So I want to maximize our time with our wonderful panel here today. I'll do brief introductions for everyone. We'll go into a bit of a few questions that I have outlined, and then we'll see if we can stump anyone. And then we'll turn it over to the audience, both in person and online. I'll be checking the online comments for any questions that come in through the YouTube chat or through our email at council@wacnh.org. Happy to have your questions. So I'd first like to introduce Senator Shaheen. Senator Shaheen is the first woman in U.S. history to be elected both as a governor and a U.S. senator, one of the many wonderful firsts for women here in the state of New Hampshire. She's a senior member of the Senate Appropriations, Armed Services, and Foreign Relations Committees. She fights for a U.S. national security policy that centers around strengthening key alliances, improving trade relations, and bolstering New Hampshire's role in national defense. We're not done yet. We've got a lot of things that she is a part of that makes sense for what we're doing here today, and I want to make sure you all are aware of the great things she's doing as a representative of New Hampshire. She's also the co-chair of the bipartisan Senate NATO Observer Group and the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee on overseeing policy towards Europe. In addition, she's committed to defending democracies around the world, including Ukraine as it fights for its freedom. Finally, one last thing, she was recently awarded the 2023 Transatlantic Leadership Award by the Council on European Security Analysis. She was awarded this in recognition of her work on the Senate Ukraine Caucus. And I'd like to share from former Senator Gordon Humphrey, who just joined us in the room. Welcome, Senator. Morning. So a comment that he sent to me when we were talking about the senator receiving this award. He wrote, Senator Shaheen has very skillfully used her senior positions on the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committees to take the lead in fighting for Ukraine's survival. As a citizen of New Hampshire, a former member of the same Senate committees, and a member of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire, I salute Senator Shaheen for her steadfast and exemplary leadership. So thank you, Senator Shaheen, for everything you do and everything that you continue to do. We really appreciate it. Okay, now you can clap. Also with us, we have Katerina Nazarova from Building Community in New Hampshire. Thank you to Rick for making her available to us for this conversation. Katerina comes to us from Ukraine. She moved to New Hampshire in August of last year. So she's been here for just over a year. She works at Building Community in New Hampshire as a case manager, helping to resettle Ukrainians here in the States, although I just found out that that is unfortunately on pause with the lapse in government spending or appropriations. The budget, the continuing resolution, did not include money for that, so we are sorry to hear that, but I'm sure Senator Shaheen will do her darndest to get that back up and running before the 17th of November. So Katerina works with over 700 Ukrainians here in the States and is doing full resettlement work through a federal grant that Building Community in New Hampshire received earlier this year. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you.
Finally, we'll do a joint introduction for Alex Ray and Susan Mathison. They are both the co-founders of Common Man for Ukraine, which is a 501c3 nonprofit focused on providing food and humanitarian aid, as well as trauma counseling for orphans and displaced children in Ukraine. They supplied more than over 800 tons of food to the people of Ukraine, over 10,000 sleeping bags, and most importantly, monthly 3-week trauma counseling retreats for over 300 children of fallen Ukrainian soldiers over the past several months. They've been there 6 times already and have another trip coming up next month. They've also set the audacious goal of raising over $10 million for their work and continuing to support the people of Ukraine in this humanitarian way. So thank you to Alex and Susan as well. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us today. I've got to now pull out my notes on the questions I had outlined, and that's not them. So first, Senator Shaheen, we'd like to just get from you a little bit of scene setting on what your initial thoughts are about where things stand in terms of Ukraine, the support that the U.S. government has provided, and where things go from here.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. Okay, I'm not turned on here. Thank you, Tim, to you and the World Affairs Council, to all of you for being here, to those who are watching online, and I'm so honored to be part of this panel with Alex and Susan and Katerina. They're going to talk, I'm sure, about some of the humanitarian needs for Ukraine. So, in addition to giving you some idea of where I think we are with respect to support in Congress, I wanted to talk about the national security imperative for continuing to support Ukraine. I think there is a lot of bipartisan support in the Congress, particularly in the Senate, for Ukraine. We had a chance about 2 weeks ago to hear from President Zelensky, who has been remarkable. He has shown so much courage and leadership for his country. And he talked with the Senate caucus, Democrats and Republicans, about the challenge facing Ukraine, about the status of the conflict right now, about the courage of the Ukrainian people, and the challenges that they're facing, which we see on television every night, the terrible bombing of the small village, and all of those killed, civilians killed. And there was a lot of support for that. And I think, as I think about where we are, there is an understanding that we need to continue to provide aid to Ukraine, that the Ukrainian people are fighting for democracy, not just in Ukraine, but for democracy everywhere. It's kind of an abstract concept and hard, I think, for people who may be concerned about their immediate needs to think about that, but I think it's really true. And as we think about why it matters to the United States, I had a group of women Ukrainian soldiers in my office last fall, and they were talking about their needs for equipment and munitions. And one of the young women said to me something that I have repeated often. She said, "You need to give us the equipment so that we can fight the Russians so that you don't have to." And I think there is an understanding and appreciation on the part of most of my colleagues that that is the case, that if we don't stand up to dictators like Vladimir Putin today, then if he's able to roll over and take Ukraine, then where is he going to stop? Is he going to stop in Poland? Is he going to stop in the Baltics? Is he going to stop in the rest of Eastern Europe that were part of the Soviet Union? I can tell you that the leaders of those countries that I've talked to don't believe that he will stop with Ukraine. And we also know that our adversaries are watching not just Russia, but Xi in China, North Korea, Iran. They are watching very closely what happens in Ukraine, the continued support for Ukraine from both the United States and from our European allies. One of the things that I think Vladimir Putin badly misunderstood was the willingness of NATO and our allies to come together in support of Ukraine. He thought that going into Ukraine was going to fracture NATO, that it would fracture the European alliance, and it's done just the opposite. Now, the important thing for us is to make sure that it continues to do just the opposite, to make sure that people understand why this is in America's interest. As we were having a number of briefings in the last weeks about the current budget situation and why supporting Ukraine is so important. And one of the things that was pointed out is that what we have seen is a degrading of the Russian army in a way that has been amazing. I think most of us at the start of the war in Ukraine, the conventional wisdom was that Ukraine would not be able to hold on longer than a week. And what we've seen is a Russian army that did not have the capacity that it was touted to have. But of course, they continue to resupply, continue to get arms from places like Iran and North Korea, and continue to fight the Ukrainians. But that impact, the ability to show to particularly China, who as we look at as a long-term competitor, that we have both the capacity and the commitment to stay with this fight is really critical. And I think it's important for all of us as we think about why this is important to us here in New Hampshire, to share that with our neighbors, to talk about this is about the courage of the Ukrainian people that has been so apparent. And I know that Katerina and Alex and Susan will talk about that and what they see. But it's also about what's in our own national security interests here in New Hampshire and in the United States. And that's what we have to remind people. As John Tester, who is a senator from Montana, who many of you know is generally considered pretty frank. But one of the things John said at our caucus that we had last week when we were talking about this issue is he said, "I don't want my grandchildren to have to go to Europe to fight another land war. And if we don't stop this now and restore international order, then that's what we're looking at." So again, thank you all very much for being here, and thank you to the other panelists.
Well, thank you, Senator Shaheen, for those remarks. I think really sets a nice stage for the conversation we're going to have here today. Kate, I wanted to turn to you as a Ukrainian with lived experience that is quite vital and important to the conversation. Can you just talk about the experience you had, the experiences you're hearing and sharing from other Ukrainians who are coming to New Hampshire, about what this has meant to you and what sort of the broader picture of other countries coming to Ukraine's aid has meant as well.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. I have a pleasure to see you all today. Thank you so much for the invitation. So from my own experience, I think the Western support to Ukraine is very important, and I can tell you why. There are still millions of people who've been displaced from Ukraine, and they still have belief that one day they would go back to Ukraine. So without getting support from Europe and United States, probably they would not have the support and belief. So it is very important for all of us, at least to know that one day the Ukraine will be free again. And lots of people, especially in New Hampshire, they're still following the news. We work with approximately 700 Ukrainian families, and probably 80% of them, they're counting the days until they would go back to Ukraine to see their husbands, mothers, wives, husbands, kids, grandkids. So basically that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so Alex and Susan, there are a lot of opportunities to be involved in the world out there, and I know that you guys have been in various recovery efforts and crises. Can you talk a little bit about what drew you to this cause as something that you really wanted to rally support around, and why it's so important to you?
Common Man for Ukraine had very humble beginnings. Alex and I are dear friends as well as our partners. We are typical small town New Hampshire coffee shop visitors. And after the bombing started, we looked at each other and said, we have to do something. And what Alex knew at the pit of his heart, his deep, deep heart, generous heart, was that lots of people wanted to help. That people all over New Hampshire wanted to help, but they didn't know how. And we tested that theory. Alex donated the first $1 million as a challenge grant to give people of New Hampshire an opportunity to help people in Ukraine outside of whatever the government was doing, and to show our love and support for kids. And Alex suggested, let's go over to Ukraine and find out what they need and how people could help, which was a preposterous idea. We're 4 people sitting in a coffee shop in Plymouth, New Hampshire, and Alex said, let's go to Ukraine. Well, what we did was we contacted Rotary International, the president of all the Rotary clubs in Poland and of Ukraine, and said, we want to come and help. And we needed to narrow our focus. So we wanted to know what's the best way we could help. And that's what brought us across the border and into Ukraine to visit people and towns and villages to see what was needed. And it was so very clear that we needed to focus on kids, the youngest and most vulnerable victims of the war in Ukraine. And we found them hiding in bunkers and in basements and in refugee centers and in safe houses, hidden away in secret locations. And the social services systems in Ukraine are quite robust pre-war, but they couldn't keep up with the demand now, as kids by the tens of thousands came on trains day after day after day to these safe houses. And it just became clarified with every trip that this is where our focus would be. And so we've provided 800 tons of food to kids in these safe houses. We supply food on about a 40-day rotation. As the war drug on and the seasons changed, we realized we needed to address the concerns for warmth and electricity. So we stocked our warehouses in Poland with 10,000 sleeping bags, and then generators purchased from all over the European Union to deliver into these safe houses week after week after week, and the work continues. And then Alex is a tremendous humanitarian and easily bridges the gaps of languages. And what we learned by working with these kids was that their trauma was overwhelming. The fact that they were hiding in safe houses, not knowing how mom or dad was, if dad was still okay, is my school there, is my community there, is grandma's house still there? The loss of their parents, we knew we had to extend our reach beyond food and warmth and go right to love.
How did I pick up? I like the word love. So one of the early things we realized is that these children were living in hell, and in order to help with them, we just discovered an idea of taking the children under 12 that had lost a father, more than likely, or a family member, or both, and gave them 3 weeks in Poland, away from planes and stress and subway undergrounds, and it turned, and we have a group of supporters there, and we've done lots of things, and it was taking them away from the whole thing, and it was amazing. And even better news is that they're back home now, and every month we would do another one with a week's time in the middle, so the people that are serving them have a break. And it's $1,000 per person to cost, and they get that 2.5 weeks, and then they meet all these people that are in the same, for lack of a better word, in the same boat. They've lost something awful, and they get together with these kids and with these in their house we call a camp, but it's a beautiful facility, and every day there's things for them to do. We've taken them on the things as she's mentioned, and right now I'm wondering how they're doing at home, but they took each other's phone numbers, and this will go on for the rest of their life, remembering this 3 weeks together, 2.5 weeks together, and we'll keep going on that. And the funny thing I hear is, how long are you going to do this? We're going to stay. We stay with it, because I like what Polinsky says is not if, but when. That's the best sentence I've heard, and I love that. He said, not if we lose, but when we lose.
When we win.
When we win, yes, sorry. That's why she does most of the speaking.
Okay, great. Well, I love the idea of building those connections for those kids. The resiliency networks and things of that nature, I think, are so powerful. I want to take a quick poll of the room and our online audience. I recently saw a USA Today poll, 500 Republicans in the state of New Hampshire, and 48% said stop funding, 48% said continue or increase. So I'd love to get a sense of the room. Quick show of hands, and put your answers into the chat if you're online. But who in the room and online feels that the U.S. government should continue to support Ukraine or increase the support? Okay, not surprising. Okay, that just, we'll skip the other options, because there we go. But I'd like to turn this to the panel and hear from all of you. Many people, there is a rising chorus here in the US as well as around the world, saying enough is enough for many, many reasons. We have seen a government in Slovakia just be elected that is on Russia's side of things. So is this important? Is supporting Ukraine in a myriad of ways, not just with military support, because there are very critical needs for the entire country, but is it important, is it in the U.S. interest to continue and support the people of Ukraine? Why don't we start with you, Senator?
So did I not make my case earlier? Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that it is in our national security interests, both because as we look at as you heard Tim say, I serve on both the Armed Services and the Foreign Relations Committee. But one of the things that we hear about on the Armed Services Committee is the new era that we're in that is about strategic competition again. It's about great power competition. It's about the competition from Russia and China. And there is, and this is in all of the open source reports, that China has designs on Taiwan, that they believe that Taiwan should be part of mainland China. And there are lots of reasons why in the United States we think it's important that Taiwan remain an independent country, not the least of which is the fact that about 80% of the semiconductors in the world are made in Taiwan, and if China takes control of that, they're going to have a monopoly on not just refrigerators and dishwashers, but cars and missiles and everything else that is made with semiconductors. Now, it's one reason we passed the Chips and Science Act.
Sorry.
They're watching you, Alex.
That didn't happen just now. We'll edit it out in the recording.
But again, as we think about the challenges that we face in America, the best thing that we can do to show that China needs to think twice about designs on Taiwan, that Russia needs to think twice about designs on Poland or the Baltics, that North Korea needs to think twice about whether all these missiles that they're developing, they're really going to send over to the United States or to other of our allies. And Iran needs to rethink its terrorist policy across so much of the Middle East, is what happens in Ukraine. Because they are watching, and they are watching whether, Putin is banking on the fact that in a democracy, and she too, that in a democracy, we're not going to be able to keep people together to support this effort, that there will be fracturing and people will decide, no, I'd rather spend that money, doing something else than continuing to fight Russia. And that is a short-term, if you know anything about history, you know that that is not a solution to the problem. So I believe it's very clear that it's in America's interest to continue to support this effort. And yes, and lots of other countries' interests, which is why we've seen a coalition that includes not just our NATO allies, but Japan and South Korea or the Republic of Korea, Australia, New Zealand, countries all over the world that understand what's at stake here.
Katerina, what are your thoughts?
I completely agree on that. I think Ukraine is one of the biggest countries in Europe. If Ukraine would give up, or somebody would give up on Ukraine, for Russia to attack a different country would be a piece of cake. It will be very, very easy. So, and it's going to be completely end on our democracy. So we need to stand strong and to show that democracy is still in place, that people have their rights, and nobody can touch the independent country, especially in 21st century.
Thank you. Susan or Alex?
I'll just start quickly. These are kids. When we go over there and work with these children, feed them, love them, keep them warm, they know where that help is coming from, our help. Our help is coming from Americans, like people sitting in this room, from the 3,000 New Hampshire donors that are sending this love to them. And these are the children that will rebuild Ukraine. We are building and caring for and feeding the leaders of Ukraine that will rebuild that democracy. We must be present. We must do the right thing for those kids.
Well spoken. Mine is that we are concentrating on the children, period. We're not politically thinking about who's doing what, but and what we can do with this, and that's our number one. Also, I feel very strongly that we don't say whether the United States helps or not, but the whole world is watching, and watching isn't good enough. And whether it's we need everyone to kill this. I was driving down the hill this morning, and the situation there was 89 people were killed during the night in Ukraine. And I say what is right and what is wrong, and I don't think there's any question that we should support Ukraine as much as we can. That's about it. Thank you.
Okay, you've all been to Ukraine, and we know there's a lot of disinformation, misinformation that goes on, especially in the fog of war. I'd love to just get quick responses, insights from all of you, and then we'll turn it over to the community for questions. Can you talk about what you have seen and experienced there, and does that match with what you're seeing and hearing in the U.S. media as it is? Oh, yeah, whomever. I guess you guys probably were there the most recently.
Yeah. The Poles are amazing humans. The country of Poland has opened its doors wide to millions upon millions of refugees. Many have gone beyond Poland, many have gone back to Ukraine. But the amount of commitment and love, financial support that Poland has given Ukraine is unfathomable to me. Are we that generous? Or will we stand up to our neighbors for our neighbors? I'm challenged by that thought. I'm not sure, and I hope we would. The Ukrainians are good people. Is there corruption? Well documented. Does that mean we should stop our aid? No, it doesn't. There are millions upon millions of honest, good, hardworking, loving, kind Ukrainians who want the best for their country for all the right reasons. That's our experience. That's who we've met day after day after day, from the youngest kid to the oldest senior citizen, good humans who want to help each other from Poland into Ukraine, and good Ukrainians that want to share and see success in this war.
Again, you speak so well. I feel that as our country that we owe a debt of supporting the absolute tyranny, if that's the right word, of not just what's happening today, but how far out this is going to run. I think it was this morning or last night I heard a report that one of the biggest products in Ukraine is vegetable oil, which is a plant called rape
Rapeseed.
And it's rapeseed, and they can't use it for an unimaginable future because of the how do you say it?
Cluster bombs.
Those things that they've put in the ground that kill.
The landmines.
So they can't use the fields anymore, or people will die 10 years from now for stepping on one. And it's amazing. We've got to go full force on this I can't see any other way, that's all. We can't sit by.
What I can say, what you currently see on TV sometimes, it just shows you the whole picture in general of what's happening in Ukraine. But if you look deeper inside, there are 10 million of people who've been displaced from Ukraine. So we need to get these people back to Ukraine to rebuild the country. And another one, we was really focusing on importing the products from Ukraine before to Europe, and now we don't have enough supplies even for Ukraine. So there are a lot of challenges behind right now we need to work on.
Thank you.
Yeah, one of the things that I think we didn't realize until this war started was the extent to which the grain that's grown in Ukraine feeds the rest of the world. And what we've seen is in parts of Africa and Asia where they depend on that grain, questions about what the war means for them. And one of the messages that's coming out of Russia is blaming the United States and Ukraine for starting the war in an effort to say it's the Allies, it's Ukraine that's responsible for the fact that there are people who aren't getting enough to eat in Africa. So it is the disinformation and the misinformation that is out there is really significant. And, you know, unlike the battlefield where we've have generations of figuring out how to fight, we don't have as good a background on how to fight that kind of disinformation and misinformation. There are some countries, and I've had a chance to visit some of our Baltic neighbors, and they are much more proficient in how to respond to disinformation than we are in the United States because they've been dealing with it from Russia for such a long time. But we've got to get a lot better. I remember hearing from General Breedlove, who was the head of European Command at the time that the KLM airliner was shot down in Ukraine, and there was a whole story about, well, it was the Ukrainians that did it. And he came before the committee and he said, as long as it takes us 2 years to be able to refute that notion and definitively say that it was the Russians who shot down the airline, then we are going to be at a disadvantage. And it's one of the challenges that we have now as we think about how to help correct the narrative around what's happening in Ukraine and the war. And it's really disappointing to me to see Americans who are out there in support of Vladimir Putin, complimenting Putin, looking at an autocrat like Putin who is killing so many civilians and talking about him in admirable terms. And I think we should all take offense at that because it's important for us each to correct the record as misinformation gets put out there.
Well, I'll do a shameless self-promotion here then. I'm glad you brought up the idea that the West is at fault for the war. I wrote an op-ed for our website. You can find it in our latest news called "Is Putin a Puppet of the West?" And the main thesis being that if we are at fault for the war, then that means we control Putin and he has no agency or choice in the matter. I don't think he would agree to that, but it's an interesting thought. Okay, we've got about 15 minutes for audience questions. We do have a microphone in the back, so please do wait for that, and we'll maybe make it easy and start in the back and work our way forward. Please do introduce yourself so we know who you are.
Hi, I'm Carlos Evans. Just so you know, I have a background. I'm a professor of Russian and Ukrainian history. I've lived in Ukraine. I've been doing work with the Common Man for Ukraine, and actually had the privilege or disprivilege of meeting Vladimir Putin twice in my life. So my question builds on what was just mentioned. Russia is masterful at propaganda. It has a 100+ year history of knowing how to do this to control the message and what it wants to say. It's doing a very successful job because we tend to be less experienced at reading what this propaganda really is in parts of the West. What as everyday people sitting in New Hampshire going to a coffee shop or talking with our family, no matter what our political beliefs might be, do to help people understand just how dangerous that is and help people to understand what is real propaganda and what is not. You know, learning from the neighbors is probably Finland as well would be great, but how do we help people to understand it? My husband and I see it. We look at it and we call it Russian KGB playbook item number 37, and we can quote exactly when they did it in the past over the last 150 years. But that's not, most people have not seen that and not have had that exposure to see what they're trying to do.
So first and foremost, send them to the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. We have a wonderful library of online events for people to view and have a number upcoming throughout the year. But please, anyone want to take that to start?
I think it's a challenge that we've got to think about how to confront at a whole variety of levels. I mean, for example, there are some pretty credible reports to suggest that the chaos around the removal of the Speaker of the House was contributed to by Russian bots, that the concern about how Speaker McCarthy was behaving, that was fed by many of those bots. So I think we've got to look at a whole range of things. You know, we got better after the 2016 election of recognizing that foreign influence was going to meddle in our elections, and we were going to take some action to address that. And we did much better in 2018 and 2020 in addressing that. But it's also about education. It's about us trying to encourage our neighbors and our family members to look at where the supposed news reports are coming from, and to make sure that, you know, they're coming from a credible source, so that it's not just somebody spreading misinformation, television. But it's a long-term challenge, and it's one that we've got to focus more on. I believe we need like one person in charge of the government who is working on this issue, who has the ability to oversee what goes on. Right now, that's pretty dispersed. We have an agency within Homeland Security. We have one within the Department of Defense. We have, you know, multiple people who are trying to address this, and I think we've got to get much better at it.
I have a more grassroots thought. You are each a network. Every single one of you is a network. You know someone in St. Louis and Seattle and Arkansas and Florida, and you have a voice. And in the first trip to Ukraine, we were planning our entry across the Polish border, and the night before there had been active bombing in Lviv, and that was our first night, and our Polish host said, "Are you sure you want to go?" I'm a soccer mom, right? But what we landed on is we need to be brave like Ukrainians. So use your network and your voice and be as brave as a Ukrainian to stand up for them in your network.
Yeah, Harry. Just get Harry. Wait for the mic for the online audience. Behind you, other side.
Harry, I'm a professor of design at Southern New Hampshire University. I'm also in the process of negotiating a visit from a Ukrainian artist and designer living outside of Kyiv, whose life was turned upside down with the leveling of Kherson. And she's an amazing woman, and I've gotten tons of support from the university offices and Tim Horgan and the World Affairs Council to help fundraise to bring her over, and I'm really looking forward to this visit. I think it's going to happen. But I wanted to just comment on what you said about the network. The problem with my network is we're all on board. It's just like the people, everybody in here. We're all on board with what we think should be done on different levels, politically, on the humanitarian level. But Senator Shaheen has got her work cut out for her because there is a strong platform historically of isolationism in the United States. And I mean, I could just point out I'm a Jew, and I know the history of what happened in World War II. There was no skin in the game for the U.S. until the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and Jews were sent back to Europe, turned away, even though there was broad knowledge among the educated that Jews were being annihilated in Germany, and et cetera, et cetera. So what Senator Shaheen is dealing with is an inherent history of a legacy of isolationism with all kinds of rationales for it. What the hell do I have to pay attention to over there? There are other places in the world that also need attention. Why Ukraine? So I appreciate your job, what you have to deal with, politically, and I appreciate your work. I did have a question about the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, which is in Ukraine, and what the status is there of its security. Because talk about skin in the game, if that place blows, well, go figure, something like 10 times worse than Chernobyl.
Thank you. Senator, I think that's probably best for you.
I can't tell you what the exact status is of that Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant right now. I can tell you that some of the imminent concerns that we heard months ago, earlier in the spring, are not as loud right now as they were, but I think there's good reason to watch very carefully. And I know that the IAEA, the International Nuclear Body, is watching very closely what happens there. And I don't know, Kate, you may have an update from talking to folks, or you all from talking to folks in Ukraine, that's more up to date than my information.
Actually, it's basically the same what Senator Shaheen just mentioned to us. Everybody's been watching, and we're just praying that nothing could happen, but there are currently no updates, and I think if Russians, they want to do that, nothing would stop them. It's the same what happened with Azovstal. If maybe somebody was aware, there's still hundreds of people that have been evacuated from Azovstal to Russia, and nobody hears nothing about them.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Jim Carnevale, President of Strategic Growth Partners and former Raytheon Director of NATO in Europe. I'd like to say, Senator, you gave a very powerful reason that the United States should continue to support Ukraine. I'd like to get the whole panel to maybe answer the next question. And the question is, what's the path to peace? What does that look like? And I think we could really get three perspectives here. We could get humanitarian and disaster relief. I'd love to hear your thoughts. We could hear a native speak about your vision for the future and the path forward. And we could certainly all benefit from a respected Senate leader and your thoughts. Thanks.
That's all.
I don't know if that was on.
No, yeah.
Hi. I'm going to bring up something that it's been on my mind for 10 years, maybe 25, and that is in the big picture, this is the first time I've ever tried this, but the big picture is we need to get our United States citizens to engage themselves more. And it isn't more, and it hasn't been more for years. It's getting less and less. I like to think that we've got the right people in government that will do what we want, but I think it's the other way around right now, that the public is losing the game. And I think of I'm a visual person, so think of a seesaw for anybody over 50. The others don't even understand. But so one end is the population of eligible voters, people that care, and the other end is the greed of the world, for dollars. And I see these people at the top of the seesaw. The only thing about this seesaw is it's locked in the middle. The other one moved. So this one is the top is all the people that are public, and the other end is the money machine and personal greed, corporate greed, and disengaged. So what happens is the people are falling off the top one at a time. I remember the Iraq or someone having to go to put their finger of purple ink on their finger to show that they voted, and it better be there or they were going to be eliminated. And I think I'm going to say something that's kind of weird. A good friend of mine is Ben from Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream. And again, for you older people, you remember him saying, "Get the money out of politics or out of campaigns." And the thought was right, but it's a totally impossible. I just picture myself going to anyone, a company, Raytheon or something, and saying, you don't have to send your money somewhere else or bury it or greed it. And they'll go, oh, okay, we'll cut our profits for you. You know, you got to turn around, forget trying to say we don't want to be driven by the dollar or the greedy people. So what we do is turn around 180 and say to people, it's yours, do something, just vote. What are we at, 35 or 40% eligible voters? And another country is going to the polls under the threat of death. And it's consistently there. We've got to turn that thing around, and that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Just speaking for Common Man for Ukraine, we operate on a path towards peace. One full-on eye contact, hug, here's a meal, we care about you. That's our strategy. One kid, one hug at a time.
So actually it's my dream to see Ukraine after peace. So after peace I see Ukraine like one huge, big, independent country with a strong democracy, with strong beliefs. And the most important for us would be to bring all the refugees back to Ukraine, to rebuild the country and make it strong again. And be example for other countries to fight for the freedom.
It is certainly a great example for the rest of the world. So thank you, Trina. I don't think any of us know yet how this war is going to end. The conventional wisdom is, and actually, let me back up a little bit. The U.S. policy, foreign policy, has been nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. So Ukraine is going to have to decide when and if they want to negotiate with Putin to end this war. we know that most conflict ends in negotiation. Usually there's some significant battlefield advantage that causes people to go to the negotiating table and to try and reach some other accommodation. So as we look at how this continues to play out, Ukraine continues to make very difficult, slow, but steady progress in terms of their offensive. And while it's being talked about a lot as not being as successful as anybody anticipated, I think what's really impressive is that they continue. And they continue to make small gains in ways that are significant. They continue to undermine Russia's army. And the challenge is, of course, that Russia is a much bigger country, has many more people to throw at this fight, more money, but that's why this effort is so important to support Ukraine in what they're doing. I mean, the challenge is, I remember being in Munich. There's a big security conference every year in Munich. And I remember being there after Putin went into Crimea. And there were a number of us who met with Secretary Clinton and members of the Obama administration. John McCain was there. And the Europeans, Angela Merkel and the British and the French, were talking about concerns that they didn't want that war to escalate. And that if we gave lethal weapons to Ukraine, there was the potential that it would escalate. There were a number of us who argued that we needed to do that. And I think hindsight now is that we'd have been better off had we done that, because what we did was to empower Putin. And so he has come back. So I think again, it's why it's so important to support this effort, because, and to support not just the military side, but the humanitarian and the economic side. One of the things that the administration has done in the last few weeks is to appoint a woman named Penny Pritzker, who was the Secretary of Commerce during the Obama administration, to head up the economic and really the economic rebuilding of Ukraine, to try and focus on what do we need to do in order to ensure that once the conflict is over, that the country can rebuild. And I think that's a really positive effort. And certainly the kinds of humanitarian work that Alex and Susan, that Kate is involved in, that so many people in New Hampshire have supported, are critical as we think about how do we help people who are dealing with this war right now.
And I'd like to also add to that the only way that this war ends imminently is if Putin is the person to decide that this war needs to end. He's the only one who can make that decision. If the West stops supporting Ukraine, Ukraine will continue to fight this war. So really the only way that this ends in a quick manner is if Russia and if Putin decides that it needs to end. I'm not saying that that is likely or anything of that nature, but as we think about it, as we talk about whether or not the West should continue to support Ukraine or not, I think it's important to note that Ukraine will continue to fight until the very last person, till the very last bullet, to defend their country. So I see we're a bit past time, but I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to get any final thoughts or comments from our panelists, and make sure that we hit all the big things you want to mention. So Susan, why don't we start with you? You look like you have something to say.
Not too much. We are a 100% volunteer-run organization, from Alex and I doing this to every last truck driver that puts his life on the line in Ukraine to deliver food to kids they'll never know. And we can't do it without donations. And so it's a shameless plug for commonmanforukraine.org. We will use every donation with great care to provide food, warmth, and love to the kids of Ukraine.
So take the little blue card. Spread it.
Another point, besides supporting people in Ukraine, we also need to support people who arrive to United States, because most of our clients is a single woman with the kids who's struggling, and kids been throughout a lot during the past year, and some of them doesn't want to talk to no one. So if we can just help them, if you would see any Ukrainian families who are struggling, or the kids who are closed inside, please feel free to reach us, and we'll be more than happy to help them.
Can I just ask, please, is it done through the International Institute?
No, it's building community in New Hampshire.
The International Institute is doing work as well. And
Yeah, those are the two organizations that got the federal grant to help resettle.
Well, I would just echo what's been said here and the importance of the World Affairs Council, of Common Man for Ukraine, of the work that Kate is doing, and so many grassroots organizations in New Hampshire are doing to support Ukraine. There's a Ukrainian church here in Manchester that is doing very good work, and the difference that that will make. And it's important for each of us to share this message with the people we know, with our networks, Susan, to let them know why this is important for all of us. And you know, if we do that, I know that the Ukrainians will be successful.
Great. Well, thank you so much to our panel. Thank you to everyone who joined us here today, both in person and online. There is a recording that will be immediately available once we end the live stream. So speaking of networks, please do share the video link out as you have these conversations, as you continue to talk about the importance to you and why it's important for you to see this aid continue. We appreciate everyone taking the time and having the interest in having this conversation. As I said, this is the start of the conversation, we hope, and we hope that you feel a bit more prepared to go out and talk about this critical issue. So thank you very much for joining us here today, and we look forward to seeing you at future World Affairs Council of New Hampshire events. Have a great day.